All right, so we're diving into the whole Diddy party scene. And let me tell you, the sources you found, yeah, let's just say they're juicy. We're talking A-list, crazy themes, but also some pretty dark stuff too.
Yeah, it's a real mixed bag, isn't it? Like, on the one hand, you've got pure extravagance, but then there's this undercurrent of, well, something much less glamorous.
Exactly right. It's almost like two totally different worlds crashing into each other. So to really get this whole thing, how these parties went from legendary to kind of infamous, we got to start with the glitz and glamour, because honestly, some of this stuff is just wild. Like, I read about this party at his place in the Hamptons, all white, everything. People performing inside giant balloons. Giant balloons.
It's something else, right? And that's the thing. This wasn't just about having a good time. It was about building an image, this whole persona.
And not just any persona either. You mentioned Modern Gatsby earlier.
Exactly. I mean, Diddy actually made that comparison himself in an interview. And it's fascinating, right? He wasn't just having people over. He was creating a world. Like, he was trying to recreate that whole vibe, the wealth, the allure from the Roaring Twenties, and the guest list. Forget about it. Jay-Z, Beyoncé, even Leo DiCaprio.
It really makes you think that Gatsby thing, whether he meant it or not, maybe it fed into this feeling of being above it all, you know?
Yeah. And that's the big question, isn't it? This wasn't just about spectacle. It was calculated, I mean, this was the late 90s, early 2000s. Celebrity culture was huge, and Diddy put himself right at the center of it. Celebrity mixed with business.
Right. Like, these weren't just parties. There were product launches, networking events. It was like stepping into an ad, a real life ad for his whole empire.
Exactly. And it worked. Getting an invite to a Diddy party, that was everything. It meant you were part of this exclusive, glamorous world. It was aspirational.
But just like with Gatsby, you get the sense that behind all the glitz and the glamour, things weren't always what they seemed. And this is where things take a bit of a turn, don't they? So we're talking about this image of like pure opulence, right? Everyone wants to be there, but then it gets kind of dark. A lot of these sources you sent, they hint at this whole other side, especially as the night went on.
Yeah, it's really noticeable, actually, how the tone changes when these sources start talking about, what went on once the cameras were gone. We're talking allegations, everything from, like, inappropriate behavior to maybe even criminal stuff. And this feeling that you couldn't really speak up,
Yeah, one article even used that phrase, culture of silence. Like, people were either in on it or too scared to say anything.
Right, and that's something we see a lot in these situations, right? You get this much power concentrated in one person, especially in that world. The whole image thing, it's a recipe for things to go wrong.
And that's where those secret tapes come in, isn't it? A bunch of sources mention these tapes, and it sounds like it was more than just security cameras,
Oh, yeah, definitely. Some people even said it was like an open secret. Everyone at those parties knew about the tapes, which just adds this whole other layer to it, right? This coercion, like, you're there, you're being watched, maybe recorded. That someone could use that against you.
God, that's a scary thought. Is there anything about what was actually on them? Or if they even exist?
There was one source, claimed they worked at his label, said the tapes they had. Illegal stuff, compromising stuff, all these big names. But without actually seeing them, it's impossible to say for sure,
But even just the rumor, that's got to be powerful, right?
Totally. This atmosphere of fear, not knowing.
And we're seeing that play out now, aren't we? Celebrities, like, shutting down. Ice Cube won't even talk about it. Ashton Kutcher suddenly being super careful what he says.
Says it all, doesn't it? Nobody wants to go near it, which makes you wonder, how many people knew? Was there this unspoken agreement? Keep quiet.
It's like this whole web, and we were talking about some really powerful people here.
Exactly. And that's what's crazy. This isn't just about Diddy and some parties anymore. It's bigger than that. It's about the whole system, right?
Yeah.
How does this happen? What lets this kind of behavior go on? And the lengths people will go to protect themselves, their careers.
Man, this is a lot. I think we need a second to process this before we even get to what it all means, the fallout from all this. It really makes you think, doesn't it? You go from these extravagant parties to these, really dark accusations. It kind of changes how you see that whole world,
Yeah, it shows you that things aren't always what they seem. Right. And we see all this wealth and fame and we think untouchable. But then something like this comes out and it just shows you how vulnerable anyone can be, assuming it's all true, of course.
And not just vulnerable, but like able to use that power in some messed up ways,
Exactly. And it's interesting how this is all played out, right? The whispers, the sudden quiet. It's like watching a car crash in slow motion.
And like you said before, it goes way beyond just Diddy, right? It's this whole system, this culture where we kind of look the other way, especially if there's money and status involved.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder how many other stories are out there just like this, where speaking out is just too risky. You know what I mean?
It's a lot. So, like, what happens now? Where do we go from here?
Hard to say, really. The investigations are still going, right? So there's that. The legal side could be huge. But even beyond that, the damage to people's reputations, careers.
And maybe it sparks a bigger conversation, right, about taking responsibility, especially when you have that much fame, that much influence.
Definitely. I mean, this whole thing has really exposed the dark side of that world, that celebrity world. And it's up to us. Right? We follow these people, we buy into it. So we had to decide what we're willing to accept. What do we demand from them?
So there you have it. We started with these glamorous parties, and now, well, we're in a whole different place. It's a story about ambition, for sure, but also about excess and power and all the ways things can go wrong. What do you think? Does it change how you see all this whole celebrity culture? It definitely gave me a lot to think about.